Mirror Indy and IndyStar just published an investigation detailing how Mayor Joe Hogsett ignored conflicts of interest involving millions of dollars in public contracts and incentives. The person who seems to have benefited the most from this is Thomas Cook. He's the mayor's former chief of staff, and if his name sounds familiar, it's because he made headlines last year when 3 women came forward accusing him of sexual harassment and abuse of power. I'm joined by Peter Blanchard from Mirror Indy and Tony Cook from the IndyStar. They're both reporters who've been working on this for the past few months, and before we get into the details of this case, Peter, can you let me know a bit about who Thomas Cook is and what his connection is to the mayor?
Thomas Cook was Mayor Joe Hogsett's right-hand man for many years. Cook worked in the U.S. Attorney's Office when Hogsett was the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Indiana. He led the Hogsett's first campaign for mayor. And then, of course, Cook is Hogsett's chief of staff for many years after that. He resigns at the end of 2020. And while it wasn't known at the time, the reason he resigned is because of an inappropriate relationship with a subordinate. After he resigns, he goes to work for this downtown law firm, Bose, McKinney & Evans, and he starts signing up big name developers who are seeking financial incentives from the city. Meanwhile, the woman he had a relationship with that led to his resignation, her name is Scarlett Andrews, and she gets promoted to lead the city's Department of Metropolitan Development. And the reason that's important is because that's the city agency that is charged with giving taxpayer dollars and incentives to economic development projects. And so that relationship was really kind of the central focus of our investigation.
So, Tony, can you tell me a little bit more about what you found while reporting on this?
We looked at grants and incentives that Thomas Cook, his clients, received while Scarlett Andrews was overseeing the Department of Metropolitan Development. And they include some pretty high-profile projects: City Market, downtown, the vacant county jail site on the east side of downtown, and the former Angie's List site were all among the projects where Cook represented the developers. In some cases, we found that Andrews threw her support behind projects that were opposed by residents in the neighborhood. In other cases, she granted exceptions to luxury apartment developers, allowing them to sidestep the city's affordable housing requirements. His relationship with Andrews and his close ties to the mayor made it difficult to know whether these incentives were being awarded in the public's best interest.
When I was reading this story, it just kind of stood out to me how this is going on for a few years, and I kind of just kept having the same question pop up in my head, which is, how could this go on for so long unnoticed?
I think that's an important question, and if you look at state and local ethics laws around conflict of interest, it talks about things like a public employee can't participate in a project that could benefit, say, their immediate family members, so like their spouse or their child or a business partner. They can't have financial interests in the projects that they're awarding incentives to. In this case, you have 2 people who are romantic partners, and that's not something that is forbidden under state and local ethics laws. So it's not really clear in this case that any laws were broken here, but certainly there are a lot of ethical questions around this relationship. And in fact, we know that these questions were raised during Andrew's time overseeing the Department of Metropolitan Development. We know from our reporting that some city staffers had raised ethical concerns about Cook's relationship with Andrews, that this presented a conflict of interest. Some of these employees believed that Andrews was showing favoritism towards Cook's clients. And these concerns, eventually prompted a complaint to the city's legal office. We don't know what the result of that complaint was. It's unclear if anything happened after that. We asked the mayor about that complaint, but he said he couldn't comment on personnel matters.
Was that his response anytime you guys reached out to him about the stuff that you were finding out?
He did agree to a 15-minute phone interview with us, but during that interview, he declined to comment, repeatedly citing theoretical personnel matters and the need to keep those confidential. And so that was his response to probably 8 or 9 of our questions. He also said that, the city can't control the actions of a private attorney who's representing private developers, which is true. We questioned whether he could have put up some kind of ethical firewall. Could you ask Andrews to recuse herself from any decisions involving Cook's clients? He said private personnel matters prevented him from commenting on that. He also pointed to multiple layers of checks and balances that are in the system. So even though Andrews played a key role in recommending these projects for incentives, they did have to go through other committees, and council had to vote on them in most cases. So the mayor cited those checks and balances as a reason that he believes that all of these deals were, in fact, in the best interests of taxpayers. And we also reached out to Cook and Andrews both for this story multiple times, and they never returned any of our messages. All we can say for sure is that, they were definitely in a relationship in 2020, because that's the reason that Thomas Cook was asked to leave city government. Public records show that Andrews was living at Cook's house as recently as September, so there's reason to think they continue to be in a romantic relationship now.
Do you think this investigation could lead to a change in ethics laws?
It's unclear at this point. Last year when IndyStar and later Mayor Indy reported on the sexual harassment allegations against Thomas Cook, it led the city county council to hire an outside law firm to investigate how the mayor handled those allegations. People might remember when that report came out, it found, no legal wrongdoing on the part of the mayor, but it raised some ethical questions about the mayor's handling of the situation, and it cost taxpayers close to $500,000. And a lot of people, a lot of members of the public felt like they didn't get what they paid for in that investigation. They didn't get all the answers they were seeking. So it's unclear to me if locally, if the city county council will react in such a way that could lead to an update or a strengthening in the city's ethics laws. It's just too early to say at this point whether we'll see any kind of action, but I think it's probably worth some discussion.
It sounds like a lot of political talk and drama between city officials and the mayor, but why does this matter to the people of Indianapolis?
I think that's a really good question. The reason it matters to the public is that's taxpayer money that's tied up in these projects. And the question is, how can we be confident that these projects were in the best interests of the public? How do we know that that money was being used in the best way possible? Because that's a lot of money.
Well, there's a lot more to this story, and you can read all about it at mayorindy.org or indystar.com. There's also links in our bios. Thank you both for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you.